Okay, and hey everyone, we are here on this beautiful autumn fall Wednesday evening, and our first time to start at 7. So I'm glad you joined us, and if you're here live, I appreciate you joining in. And looks like Wendy is here. Hey Wendy, and she says hello. So we're going to wait and let a few people get online. I see we have 3 people watching now. And turn to Hebrews 11, and we're going to turn to Judges chapter 7. And Drew, Jonathan, and Nathan are here. Okay. Hey, guys, what's up? I was uh, glad to hear I've got Drew and 2 buddies watching us. So we're going to go and look at Hebrews chapter 11 right quick, because I'm going to start with Gideon tonight. That's where we're going to do Gideon all night. And looking at this in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, we're still going over what more shall I say, for the time would fail to tell me of Gideon. So I'm going to go to Gideon's story in Judges chapter 7, the part that we all know about Gideon, and that is Gideon's army and what they did. And in background now, what I'd like us to do is look at, oh, here's ESG 1977. Good to have you here, Em. So let's ask some questions. Who were the people that were oppressing the children of Israel? Who were the people who were oppressing, who were taking over, who were coming in? They were trying to get everything that the Israelites had. They were trying to get all of the Israelites' food that they'd grown, and they're trying to get the land that the Israelites had. What was the name of these people that were coming in and taking over the Israelites? So I'm going to let you, if you're at home, turn and talk about that. Who were the people who were trying to take over? And I'm going to give you a hint. It rhymes with Gideon. And Elizabeth is here. Howdy, Elizabeth. And okay. And does this say godly geek? Is that what that says for their avatar? Okay. And yes, it is. He got it correct. The Midianites. So Gideon and Midian. That's how I remember it. The Midianites were the people who were after the place where Gideon was. And even when we see Gideon, we see him threshing wheat. Where? Where was Gideon threshing wheat so that he could hide it from the Midianites? And this says, we are watching on Nathan's phone. Cool. Okay. I'm glad y'all are together watching it. I sure am. And I also know that y'all have been working on something else today. Y'all went and helped somebody today. I was really proud to hear about that. But where do we meet Gideon? He was threshing wheat somewhere. And where was he threshing that wheat? It was not where you'd normally be threshing wheat, but it was in another place. He was threshing wheat in kind of a weird place so that he could hide it. So this is the question. And if you're at home, turn and talk. Where was Gideon threshing the wheat when we first see him? So this is in our previous chapter. I'm just going to wait and see if somebody will give us the answer to where was Gideon threshing the wheat. It was in an odd place. It was not where you'd normally thresh wheat. The answer is in chapter 6. And also, while we're waiting, we got 2 or 3 more that I hope will join in. But some of them already, I have more people on the spot that shows how many are watching than I do people commenting. So I may have some of my usuals here, but they're not just commenting. So uh, looks like I need to give another hint, don't I? Well, let's just do that. So let's go to Judges chapter 6. And where was he threshing wheat is found in verse 11. Judges chapter 6. Ah, Wendy's got it in the wine press. So they would not look where the wine press was, hopefully, to find them threshing out the wheat. So he hid there. And, excuse me, he went and hid there and was threshing the wheat out in the wine press. Can you imagine having to do things in such secrecy so that you didn't have your wheat stolen? So he was threshing out the wheat in the wine press. And the angel of the Lord came to Gideon and he told him that he wanted him to do something for him, said, "The Lord is with you." And Gideon had a test. And this test was an interesting test that we want to look at. And it had to do with dew. And he wanted him to take the dew, and he wanted the dew to be on the ground one time, and then on this one time. So he wanted it on, actually, he wanted on this item one time first, and then the ground be dry. And then he wanted the opposite. He said, I want to have it dry only on this item, but all the ground have dew. What was the item used that Gideon tested the Lord with? He had something that he used to test the Lord with dew and this item. What was this item? And I'm trying to ask things in a one or two word answer so that we don't have to type too much. And Cookie's here, and she enters in with sheepskin fleece, and she is absolutely correct. That is what he used. He had the fleece, and he let the dew be on the fleece and not on the ground. And then it was the other way around. He wanted the fleece was dry, the dew was on the ground last. So God did as Gideon wanted him to do. So I really skipped a part that I don't want to skip, and that was this. God wanted Gideon to destroy an altar, and this altar was to an idol. What was the name of the idol that God wanted Gideon to destroy the altar of? Whose idol did God want Gideon to destroy the altar to? The name of this idol god was, and we're going to see this idol god all through. People worship this idol god throughout the history of their existence up until the time of the Romans. They didn't worship him then. And yes, it is. It is Baal, Baal. And Cookie got that one too. So that is very good. So he went and he pulled down this altar. 10 men helped him. They wanted to kill him for doing that. And I want you to remember this incident because we might get to touch on a little bit in this chapter today. So Gideon's life was saved by whom? Who saved Gideon's life from the people killing him when he tore down the altar. Who saved his life when Gideon, and I want the name. I want the name of who saved Gideon's life when the men came wanting to kill him for tearing down the altar of Baal. So let's see if we can find, and I want the name and I want who he is too. So I do want a little bit more on this one. All right. All right. Remember what I said? I want both the name and the relationship. I'm going to wait and see if we have more people answer this. I'm going to make a point or two on this before I go. I want the name and the relationship of who it was who who saved him from the people who came to tear down or kill him for tearing down the altar. I got some names. I need the relationship. Let's see. Let's have some more people. See if more people can come in with this. I got one answer. I see what they're saying. Okay. I think we got enough in now. I'm going to say it is Joash. This is Gideon's father, the Abiezerite. And very good, guys. You all came in together with very good answers. This is Joash. And let me say this. As fathers, as a father, one of our jobs is to protect our children. And I see one of the best examples of that, of a father who protected his son. I see one of the best examples of that right here in Joash. And so many times we're prone to look at just the fact that, well, it was the right thing for him to do, and he did give a good answer, and they shouldn't have been worshiping the idol. And we overlook the fact that he saved his son. He was a protector. Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die." And he stood against the whole town. There, men, is you a good example of someone who will protect his children. And we as men are to be protectors. And a good example of a protector as a father, we as men are to be protectors of our children. And a good example of someone protecting is definitely Joash, Gideon's father, who went and stood against the whole town for his son. And we love to say he stood for what's right. Yes, he did. He stood for his son's life. And he made the statement, well, let Baal plead for himself. We cannot overlook that he's protecting his son. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is go into the next chapter. Judges chapter 7. And I'm going to read this chapter in its entirety because now we're getting to the good part. Now we're to the part that I loved as a kid and the part that Gideon is known for. Judges chapter 7 says, "Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod. so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped putting their hand to their mouth was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands. And he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward, your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in multitude. When Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I've had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it, so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hand. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. And he put a trumpet into every man's hand with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zerorah. as far as the border of Abel Mahola by Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. And they captured two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeeb they killed at the winepress of Zeeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. So let's go back and let's comment on what we just read. Very exciting, very just would love to, something you'd love to see. Well, I guess in one way you'd like to see it. I don't want to see all the gore, but what an exciting moment this is. So let's just start with the number of people. Now, you have to go to verse 3 and you have to do some math. You have to add how many people started out with Gideon. That's your question. How many people started out with Gideon? Type in your answer or turn and talk to your families, and let's see if we can figure out how many people started out with Gideon. How many soldiers? These were all men, all soldiers. How many? I'll wait and let you answer that. Okay, I've got one answer. I got two answers. The first answer said a question mark. I'm assuming that is that correct? And these two answers are the same. So the two answers we got, when you look in the Bible, you have to deduce this, don't you? The answer we got was 32,000. Now, if we were in school, we could say, hey, let's show your work. And there's a reason for that, isn't there? How did we get 32,000? Well, let's just look, and let's look at what verse 3 says. I'm going to read verse 3. Actually, I better start with verse 2. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand saved me. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. We know that the people who came out to help him were a numerous host. Maybe not as numerous as what they were going up against, but a bunch of them. And so he tells them, just tell them, whoever's afraid, just go ahead, go on back. If you really don't want to be here, you're fearful, you're afraid, because we will find out these Midianites had camels. They were not by themselves. They had the Amalekites and the people of the east with them. They were as numerous as locusts without number, verse 12 says. So this was something to be afraid of. And he said, it's okay. You don't have to go. Go. Now, when he says that, we see in verse 3, 22,000 of the people returned and 10,000 remained. So our numbers whittled down to 10,000. So we look at this and we have 10,000 left. That's still a smaller number than what the Midianites had. But the Lord says in verse 4, there's still too many. So we're going to have to do another test. And this test is a very interesting one. And it could have been whatever test God wanted. It could have been just a whittling out test, and it could have been a test to see who was alert. But the test was this: whoever laps from the water with his tongue, like a dog laps, you're going to set him apart by himself. And whoever gets down on his knees to drink, whoever gets down close to the water, you set them apart. But the people here, verse 6, who put their hand to their mouth, they lapped, they put their hand to their mouth and pulled the water up to their hand. They were set apart somewhere else. So what we have here is, and some have said, given several reasons for this kind of a test. And really, the bottom line is this was what God said to do. Some have said, and this is something to think about, some have said that the way that they drank this way, where they went and put their face down into the water, would possibly have been a way that they were not watching. You think about that when you're down on your knees and your face is in the water, kind of you're drinking. If an enemy comes behind you while you're doing that, you're his. I mean, he can do what he wants with you. And if your hand is pulled up to your mouth, you're up more and you can watch. That could have something to play with that. Watch for an enemy. That could show watchfulness. Bottom line is this was what God said to do. And bottom line is that this was how God said to divide the people. Wherever it is, whatever the method was used for, it's cut down now to 300. You know, it's very interesting too how many water tests we see in the Bible. Tests that have to do with water. For example, there's a water test that selected Rebecca to be the wife of Isaac in Genesis 24, where verse 43 through 46, she watered the camel, had something to do with water. It was a water test that freed Israel from the pursuing armies of Pharaoh. Remember, we studied that. The water that the Red Sea separated. And then the same thing happened with the Jordan River. It separated. And it was a test of faith to walk down with a wall of water on one side and a wall of water on the other side, on the right and on the left. Could it collapse? You had to have faith in God to go. He dried the ground for them. And it's a water test that God chooses among sons of men today. Baptism by immersion. Mark 16:15-16. Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believes not shall be condemned. There's another water test, isn't it? There's another something to do with water. Water is interesting that when we see the earth created, we never are told he, on whatever day 1, 2, 3, 4, he created water. The water came with the earth. The land came up out of the water. The water was created as the earth. In fact, even scientists, I've heard them say it's funny that we call this planet Earth because it is more water than it is earth, more water than earth. But either way, looking at this, here's a water test. And there's something else you could say here, too. The people who were the 300 who pulled the water up to them, they got rid of their thirst with moderation. They didn't just try to get the whole stream. They try to just guzzle as much as they can. Drinking it with your hand up to your mouth made you moderate it. It made you even take less, perchance. If you needed less, you could use less. Less. And again, without being off their guard, and the ones who bowed down on their knees were not on their guard. But whatever the grounds of the selection, this is just a possibility. The test was quite arbitrary. It's whatever God said. And so we see them then taking trumpets. And so let's talk about these trumpets. He said to go, that they're going to be getting a trumpet and put trumpets in their hands, verse 8. And we're talking about very possibly could just be ram's horns or cow horns, a natural horn of a cow. You know, we talk about a horn being an instrument and a horn being also a part of an animal. Well, back then, oftentimes they were one and the same. When they killed the animal that had horns, they'd take the horn and turn it into a blowing instrument, a trumpet. And you can still see these today. They don't make the high pitched toned quality sound that our trumpets do today, but they made a sound that could be heard far and wide. They made a sound that could be used for a call to action. And even in our own early days here in the United States of the settlers, sometimes they would use these cow horns to call people in from the fields to eat dinner or something like that. They were still used then. And in this day and time, they were used to wake up whole cities. They would be used by a watchman on the wall where he would blow the trumpet, and that would wake them up. And many times it was not, and they did have the metal trumpets. We do see them listed, but many times the trumpet here was a horn of an animal that they could take and smooth out on the edges and even put a metal edge around the rims, and it would make a loud sound. So they took these trumpets and they let the others go. So we have 300 here left. That's a very big number left over, isn't it? 300 left. And so when 300 stayed behind, you can do your math if you'd like. In fact, let's just do some math. Let's do some more math. If 10,000 were there and 300 stayed, how many left the second time? If 10,000 began and 300 were left, how many of the soldiers were not chosen the second time? Now we're told 22,000 left out of the 32,000. And so that left 10,000. Do a little bit of math. How many people left the second time? Yay. Okay, here it comes. Yes. Thank you, Emily, for that wonderful memory. Yes, it would be. Those of you who went to the Bible Museum with our church trip to LaGrange, Georgia, may remember a few certain of our number getting in trouble in the gift shop where these horns were displayed, and certain people blew on them real loud, and the lady behind the desk got onto them and told them not to do that. Yes, they were $300, I realize, but anyway, yes, that was the exact kind of horn, Emily, that some of us got into trouble with. I didn't do it, and I say us. Some of us got into trouble with at the gift shop at the LaGrange Museum in Georgia. That lady was not happy about the horns being tested out. Sad thing is, I think one of those people was actually going to buy one till she was ugly about it. But anyway, they ended up not buying it. So there's that too. But yes, exactly. So the answer we have when you take 10,000 and you subtract 300, you have 9,700 or 9,700. So 9,700 people drank this way. Be it an arbitrary test or whatever, the Lord knew what would whittle down. And here's the whole plan. He did not want them to say that they did it by their own hand. And so you have 300. Now, without God, let's just look at the odds of a battle of 300 on one side and a huge number of people on the other side. And, in real life, it'd be like David and Goliath. In real life, Goliath would have stomped him. But with God on your side, it doesn't matter, does it? With God on your side, 300 people can also defeat a huge, innumerable host of camels and people and everything. So they get their trumpets and they get their torches and they get pitchers. Now, let's look at this. We have three things. We have a trumpet, we have a torch, and we have a pitcher. Before we get to that, let's go into something that Gideon got to hear for himself. Now, we have two camps of people, God's camp, and we have Midian's camp. And the Lord told Gideon, if you're afraid to go by yourself, get Purah, your servant, and go down to the camp. If you don't want to go by yourself, get Purah. He'll go with you. In fact, that was a good witness. They're going to sneak into the camp, and they go down into the outermost part of the armed men. So we're on the very edge of the camp. Now, could they have been caught? Were they caught? That would have been the end of everything. But of course, we know the Lord was with them. And everybody here, so numerous, they come to this camp, and this man, they eavesdrop on a conversation. And in this conversation, they hear a man telling about a dream that he had. And he's telling it to his buddy, his companion. And we don't know what time this is, very possibly at night, because he could sneak good then, or it could very possibly have been early in the morning when they're waking up, because he is telling a dream, whenever it was. This dream is very simple. He says a loaf of bread, barley bread, tumbles into the camp and knocks over a tent. And the tent is struck, so it overturns and it collapses. Now, one of the things that we got to witness when we saw the Bible Museum at LaGrange, Georgia, was one of the tents, how they were made and how thick the cloth was so that water wouldn't come through it. And that was an interesting thing to see. That cloth was very heavy. We're used to our silky thin tents that we buy at the stores today, and that's not at all what they had. These tents were heavy, they were thick, and they were staked very well. Nothing that a loaf of bread would do anything. And look, it rolls into the camp. It tumbles into their camp. It tumbles into a tent. Now, not thrown at it with such force, but just rolls and knocks over a tent. That was a good illustration of what was fixing to happen, because it was just about like letting some bread roll down the hillside and it hitting the tent and it striking it so hard, or it making it overturn and collapse. The tent fell, overturned, and collapsed. Like this one whack from this bread makes the whole thing just fall, overturn, collapse. And his companion says something very interesting back to him. He sees it as what we call an omen or a sign. He says, "Oh, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel." Let me stop right there. How did he know Gideon? How would this Midianite know Gideon? Gideon, who's the least of his family who's the least of the tribes, so forth, that he told God. How did this man know him? Well, the only other incident that we have that would bring Gideon fame would have been him tearing down the altar of Baal. And no doubt that news reached to ears everywhere, including the Midianites now who would have already been worshiping Baal. And as angered as the citizens of the town were, the Midianites and Amalekites and people of the east who would have worshipped Baal, no doubt would also have been incensed by this treacherous tearing down of their altar, especially the answer. He says, Gideon, son of Joash. You can figure in here, in among the telling of the story of Gideon tearing down the altar, was how it ended with Joash saying, "Well, if Baal is a god, why would you speak for him? Let him defend himself. If you try to speak for a god, you should be hanged." Gideon's fame had spread. But doesn't this sound also like the people of Israel's fame that spread to Jericho here a while back or before this? Doesn't this sound like what happened when Rahab told them, "We've heard of what you've done to Egypt"? And, this is just one direction from Egypt. The news probably went in a circular direction all around, down into Africa, up into toward the east and out toward the west. Gideon's fame is rising too. And it's interesting that this man's companion says this: into his hand, God. Now look at that phrase. Into his hand, God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. Was this man a believer? Possibly by this time, we do not know. He gives the credit where the credit is due. And looking at this, all of these people, God knew where to send him to. And looking at where this is and who this is, and for all we know, and here's a possibility too. It's also a possibility that the word tent there is not just any tent of any person. Some have suggested that the word tent here is a proper name. Well, kind of like, okay, the Pentagon is a proper name for the military headquarters of the United States, the Pentagon. It's very possible, and this is a possibility, that this tent means the king's tent, the tent. Almost like we know there's a lot of white houses, but there is only one White House, the White House in Washington, D.C. And so this word tent, it has been suggested, is a proper noun that could be the very king himself, and that could be who he's listening to. If that were the case, what he did would have to be most undercover to go listen to it, and would have to be, I would imagine, under the cover of darkness where he could sneak and get here this far. And so it is a possibility that this tent is talking about the tent of the king. We're not told exactly. So it could be the king's tent as well as anyone else's tent. It could have been that the king's tent was at the front. Maybe as a leader, they expected that of him. The Israelites wanted a king to go out in front of them. And so it could be that the king's tent's at the front, and it could have been the easiest place to get. If it were so, he was not very well guarded, just like Saul was not very well guarded one time when David tried. Well, David was being chased by Saul, and he went and snuck into his tent. His guard was asleep, so there's a possibility that this tent is that. But anyway, here is this barley bread. By the way, the barley is, I understand, what the poor people ate. It was the diet of the poor. And that's also very symbolic because the specific kind of bread is given that rode into this tent. And here could very well stand for Israel, the poor, those who were less fortunate now, the underdogs at this time, or even Gideon, who was the poorest of the poor, the lowest in his clan, in his family, etc. Anyway, the companion recognized this, and he says this is none other than the sword of Gideon, and this means God has delivered us into his hand. You know, this was the feeling of the Egyptians too. Pharaoh didn't ever acknowledge it, but the Egyptians were, look, God is not on our side in this, and we are getting horribly treated by what God, by God because of what we're doing against him. And we're going to suffer more. They told Pharaoh, Egypt is ruined. Well, this man here is like, that does not sound good. Who else could that be except Gideon, and that God has delivered us into his hand. Let me say something here about who was with the Midianites as well. He said here, when he answered him about this dream, he said, into his hand God has delivered Midian now and the whole camp. When you look at the way the Midianites traveled, it looks very much like they traveled with their families. It wasn't just soldiers who came. They have their camels, but they're coming, and it looks to be these people by their whole family, wives, children, bunches of people are coming into the land of Israel. Again, kind of, a land that they would have felt was their own. After all, some of these people were kicked out of right where they were 200 years or so before. And their families would be with them. And there could be quite apprehensions. People would be a little scared, a little apprehensive that, we're out here with our families. You just had this dream, and us and the camp, Midian and the camp, could be very well delivered into the hands of Gideon, the whole host of the Midianites. So, not only that, we also have to remember this. This was a day of spies, and their intelligence service could also be fully aware of thousands who now have rallied behind Gideon. They could be fully aware that 32,000 people traveling is going to be hard to hide. They also could be fully aware and not be fully aware that many people rallied behind Gideon and not be aware of how few or how many. And so this is another This is another thing to think about how much they knew already. They will be aware that Gideon had a growing number and it could be outnumbering them. So, with this, with the people who were in there, again, for 7 years, they had plundered, uninterrupted, plundered these Israelites. Nothing had happened to them before. They could also, by the way, have their flocks and herds with them. They could have everything with them. And so we have this vast number of invaders and the apprehensive, being apprehensive of their situation. Definitely, here they are. So Gideon and Purah come back from their mission and they have much confidence. And he divides the army into companies of 100 apiece. They take a pitcher, they take a torch, they take a trumpet, and what he does shows nothing but the pure omniscience. We're beyond genius, the omniscience of God. Because what they do is this: they blow their trumpets and they break the pitchers. Now, what you have to picture to get the full effect of this is what it sounded like inside the camp, because you're asleep and you hear all these trumpets. Not to mention this, as big as the Midianite hosts were, many times an army, even up through ancient times, medieval times, the old days here, a lot of times the armies only had one bugle boy, one person who blew the trumpet for them. And he would blow the trumpet for them to attack. There would be a certain sound for them to retreat if they needed to. There would be a certain sounds for this, that, and the other. Now, an army big enough to have a bunch of trumpets would have been a big army. And these pitchers, they broke them. Apparently, pottery of some kind, clay. But I want you to picture the sound of these pitchers. And I don't know what it could mean except pitchers. You take a pitcher, you break it, it makes that clinking sound. And from the inside, you hear all these trumpets. And then you hear 300 pitchers breaking. Now, it's been suggested that the sound would sound like much armor clacking together, much armor of soldiers and shields and swords and weapons, that clack, clack, clack of all of the weaponry as they get ready to advance. And then they hold their torches. They break their pitchers and hold their torches. Could be they broke the pitchers over the torches. Maybe they had a handle, they broke them. And then all of a sudden you see lights. Now, if that were the case, you see lights. There again, in an army, everybody didn't hold a light. Only torchbearers did. Some held the lights while others would fight, right? But if you have an army big enough to have this many torches, we're a big number in the Midianites. How big is this army against us? And so they're 300. They surround them. They do this ingenious, for lack of a stronger word, battle plan. And they don't have to do much of anything, because when this happens, everybody in the camp turns on each other. It throws them into mass confusion. Number one, it's nighttime, so they're half asleep, and you know how groggy you are when you're half asleep. Can you imagine having to get up and fight? And so they're all groggy, and if they have everybody else with them, that's going to be even more baggage to maneuver around. And so every man's sword was against his companion. They literally killed out each other. until a group of them flee, because the ones that do escape are not going to hang around. And it tells the places they flee to: Beth Acacia, Zerera, uh, the border by Abel, Mahola, by Tabbath. And they chase them. They're the men of Israel. Now, in verse 23, we have more people added to the number. Now, the 300 were the ones who set it apart. But don't forget, the men of Israel gathered together. And this is a part of the story we often leave out. Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh. You have 3 tribes now. Now you do have a large number of people. And they go down, and Gideon sends messengers during all of this chase to all the mountains, because remember, they had gone to the mountains to hide. And he says, come down against them, seize them. So everybody scrambles out from the mountains. And interestingly, 2 princes, Prince Oreb and Prince Zeeb, were killed. This rock of Oreb and winepress of Zeeb likely got its name because that's where they were killed. Not that it was theirs, but what they called it later. And the gory ending of victory to this story, they bring Oreb and Zeeb's heads back. These leaders, they bring their heads back to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. And here the battle ends, the story ends, and the Israelites are free from the oppression of the Gideonites. What a strategy. What a God. Our God is an awesome God. You know, awesome, being awe-struck, struck with awe, A-W-E, awe. Interesting. Here these strong people. By the way, Oreb means raven, Zeeb means wolf. And so these were warlike people, but nothing compared to God. How awesome God is. We sing the song, our God is an awesome God. And we need to remember this is why it's things like this that raise our standard of faith in God. If you have trouble with your faith, go read things like what happened to Gideon and see that God is in control. He was in control then, he's in control now. And these type of things, it was mentioned in Hebrews 11. Gideon, poor Gideon, he said, time, the Hebrews writer says, time would fail me to tell. Now, he had time, but, we have time, we have space to write things, but we know the story of Gideon. If time would fail him to tell of Gideon, there's a lot going on to Gideon. We sometimes look at Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel as, well, they're just minor people. But their stories are so big, he says why he didn't name them. Not because they were minor, because he didn't have the time to tell about them, because Gideon's story takes a long time. So do Barak, Samson, and these David. God is an awesome God. These people had an awesome faith. And I challenge you to increase your faith in God. Look at Gideon. Increase your faith in God. Don't forget that the lamps were put in the pitchers. Yes, and that would have been a tremendous sight. It's black. If they were covered with the pitchers, it's all darkness, and then all of a sudden, poof, here show up these torches. It's just wonderful strategy. I don't know what else to say. When you're in awe of something, you just sit there. If you ever seen something so beautiful or so majestic or just so awesome that you just had to sit and look at it, words could not escape. We have a picture of this with the Lord, with David, because he wanted to stand and gaze or look on the glory of the Lord. That was David's dream, to look, and I want to go, that verse just popped into my head. I had not thought of it before, but looking at the glory of the Lord and how beautiful it is. David one time said that he just wanted to be able to stand and to see, to gaze upon the beauty, the glory of the Lord. And this is kind of what I think about when I read stories about Gideon, uh, stories about Moses and the the 10 plagues, well, 10 Commandments too. But just wanting to look and to be in awe at the planning, everything behind it. Anyway, we see this. I'm going to see if I could find, but I don't find the exact verse that I was talking about. Oh, here it is. Psalm 27:4. One thing I have desired of the Lord, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. I want to dwell in this house to behold his beauty. One day we'll get to do that. We can't do it now. We can't see him face to face now. But one day we'll get to stand there to behold, to look at the beauty of the Lord, the glory of the Lord. When we do that, we just have nothing but awe. AWE, awe. Well, this is our lesson this evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you also for everybody agreeing to come to the 7 o'clock hour instead of 6 o'clock hour. We will do that again next Wednesday. In fact, we're going to have to, as we're having parent visitations at school, and those are going to last until 6. So it's going to work out just right for me to get home in time to do this broadcast, so this live stream. So thank you all for agreeing to do that. Y'all are very agreeable, easy to work with people. And if there are any other preachers listening to me, let me say I have a blessing in the church, the congregation at Dovertown, and how kind they are and easy to work with me. And I'm thankful to God for you all, and how behold how pleasant it is, when brethren dwell together in unity. And that this is just wonderful. So we're going to end right here. Let's remember those on our prayer lists, and let's look for a Google Meet tomorrow night, Bible Bow team. Tomorrow night at 7 on Google Meet. We'll study more for the Bible Bow. And also, Sunday at 11 o'clock, we will come back to the building. And at 2 o'clock, we'll come back here on this YouTube channel for a live stream. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, your studying with us, and may God bless you and give you his richest blessings throughout this next week. Good night.